Here we are at the second chapter of the dialogues. We're really dealing with one concept, and that is the concept of acceptance and denial. May sound like two, but we're going to see in a minute why it's just the same concept. Pretty elementary in some ways. Maybe not elementary, but clear, and yet at the same time challenging because of the way we've lived so far. So verse 1 begins, "You are now asked to do two things simultaneously, to accept the new and to deny the old." So he talks about what does it mean to accept. So the definition of accept is the willingness to receive. And what are you receiving? You're receiving what is true, what's here, what's showing up. That's what you're receiving. And when you deny, you refuse to accept as true that which you know is not true. So what is not true is the way that you have always functioned in an outward fashion, and the pattern of learning that has been the hallmark of your life so far. And when you accept, it's a shift. Because what's happening is you're looking at what is here, what's showing up, and you're saying, okay, I'm willing to look at this. I don't have to fix it or change it or judge it. I'm willing to receive it. And that is a crucial step in where you're going. It's also challenging to us because we have been operating from a mode of trying to manage our lives in a way that we hope will serve us well, making the decisions that we think are going to be in our best interests, trying to maintain a way of behaving that serves us, trying to maintain relationships and jobs and lifestyles and families and all of the decisions we make, and this control that we try to hold over our lives. We're being asked to surrender that control and to accept what is. And it's a big step. These are really one and the same action. You're accepting the truth of who you are, and you're refusing to live as the false self. And what this requires is denying, but not fighting, old patterns and allowing new patterns to arise. So patterns, he tells us, are learned systems of design. So we have been learning this entire time. This works. When I go this direction, I bump my head against a wall, so I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to develop a system for operating in the world that brings me the least amount of suffering. And that's the way we have programmed our minds and our behaviors to create a pattern that seems to work best. But he's asking us to let go of those patterns and to really look at the idea of patterns. So first he talks about learning as a pattern, because really that's what we've been doing since the day we were born. You've been using learning as a way to live a successful life. And so here are some of the attributes of learning. One, all learning had a natural endpoint. You try to achieve wisdom, and then once you've got wisdom, you're done. Like when you go to school, you eventually graduate, you complete a program, you learn a lesson, whatever it is that is the objective. Eventually you learn it, you master it, you're done with it, and you graduate. And then another part of that pattern is that it allows the learner to claim a new identity. So if what I'm trying to do is to learn to play piano, Eventually, I will master playing piano and I can call myself a musician or a pianist. That doesn't mean I stop using my skill, but it means I've reached that level where I now have a new skill set, or I have a new part of my identity, something I've learned and mastered. And I think that to a great degree, when we started on this spiritual journey, we started with that in mind. I'm going to learn how to master a spiritual life so that I don't have to be a spiritual seeker anymore and I can be wise. So still it was working toward being a wise person, but we're moving into a different relationship with identity now. And then the next part of the pattern is when the endpoint has been achieved, the student moves on. Once you have graduated, you move on to the next skill or the next learning method. Now, you have now completed your pattern of learning. Congratulations. The desired endpoint has been achieved in that you now recognize that you are not your body and your body mind and limited. You recognize that the identity that you formed is not who and what you are. So that was the whole point of learning in the human process, was to bring you here. That was what the pattern of learning was for, to introduce you and familiarize you with your true self. So it's time now to have an endpoint and to recognize your new identity and to move past learning. Verse 8, if you do not realize that you have learned all that you need to learn, you will retain the consciousness of the separated self rather than sustain Christ consciousness. Now, there's a difference between learning and becoming aware of. So you will still continue to bring awareness to certain patterns, certain things in your life, certain ways of looking at things. Your awareness will always be expanding. It'll never end because that's what you are. You are consciousness. But if you continue to think, well, I can't really do this yet. I need to master this material first. Or I really wanted to learn about this particular religion first. If you continue to cling to the pattern of learning and not replace it with the pattern of knowing, which is what the new pattern is going to be, then you'll stay as the separated self. And if you do, that's okay. But if you want to really know who you are and be who you are while here in this human form, then you need to leave that pattern of learning behind. So he talks a little bit about old patterns and why it's hard to give them up. For one, they're familiar to you, and because you know them, you know how they work, they provide you with a sense of certainty, and it feels kind of secure, like I know how to do this. If I want to learn how to eat like a vegan, I can read all of the books and investigate recipes, and I can find out the science behind it, and I'm comfortable with that. That's how I gain new knowledge. And it's not as if you're not going to gain new knowledge. It's just that when it comes to life and your identity and what's true for you, learning has to be left behind. As you give yourself access to the new, the old familiarity will give way. So in other words, when you are willing to actually have a first-hand experience of your identity and of what's true, then the old learning will have less and less appeal. And it will, because there's a difference between believing something and having a belief about something and having the experience of something. And this is what it's pointing to. It's calling you to experience what is true rather than to use the skill of the mind in mastering information. And then he talks about the idea of control. This is a really powerful pattern, and we've all had it. These are taken directly from the text. I can trust my government, society, and family to take care of me and protect me. The more details of my life I have in my control, the more I'm assured of my own well-being. And this is really how we've survived so far, by trying to control and manage our lives. And it's been what we've considered normal. It's what was expected of us as we matured, that we would learn enough that we could function in the world in what we were believing was a mature adult way. So personal standards and systems that we've set ourselves through trial and error come into play. Oh, when I put my hand on the stove, it hurts. I'm not going to do that anymore. Trial and error. And we all have adages we've lived by. These are a couple the examples he gave in the text. When in doubt, work harder. Information is power. I used to live and breathe by that which does not kill me makes me stronger. It was the way that I coped to deal with certain things that came up in my life. So we all have those, and we're laying them down now, actually. All patterns have had to do with learning, because as a separated self, your only function was learning. There you go. So it's not like you screwed up. That was your function when you believed yourself to be separated, and it was the only way to get where you are now. So learning is a wonderful tool, and it's a tool you'll still use while you're still in form, but not about this, not about your identity. Verse 19, all systems have been based upon your desire to understand the world around you rather than the world within you. Now, this is where the shift is happening, because formerly the idea was, if I can manage the world around me, I'm going to be fine. And now the shift is turning in and being in constant relationship with that which is happening within you. Your immediate response may be a desire to learn a new system, one that works or works better, and that's our instinctual response. And verse 21 says, what this points out is a pattern within itself. It's a pattern of reaction rather than cause. It's a pattern of looking without and wondering what to do about what you see, rather than a pattern of changing what you see by looking within. So you can probably pick up on the fact that this is how it's all going to break down, is that looking within to know how to respond to life and using the wisdom from there. Verse 22, within is where the real world and all your brothers and sisters exist in the unity of Christ consciousness. Change within affects change without, not the other way around. Within is where you look to your own heart rather than to any other authority for advice or guidance. I suspect that you are probably already doing this to some degree, because of the fact that you're becoming more and more in touch with your heart and recognizing the authority of your heart. And so this will just increase that when there's a response that's called for in what appears to be your life, that you'll be checking to see if it's in harmony with your own heart, and will learn that I will only respond to whatever's in harmony with my own heart. And we do this actually by trial and error, because when we respond in a way that is not in harmony with our heart, it just irritates, it distresses. We become so accustomed to enjoying our own peace of mind and enjoying that symbiotic relationship with that voice within, that when we are out of sync with it, it's just about intolerable. And that will increase. That increases because that voice and that heart becomes more and more your authority. And by the way, an authority that you can absolutely trust. So the only remaining question, he tells us, is how do I sustain Christ consciousness in form? And of course, this is a question that every spiritual adept has to ask, because we all have times when we are more connected and feel more in sync with that eternal divine energy that we are. And then there are times when we're completely caught up in the personal self again. So it becomes then a matter of sustaining Christ consciousness. And interestingly, he doesn't answer that out and out. But of course, how you sustain Christ consciousness in form is by developing new patterns. The old patterns, which had you constantly looking out at what's happening outside of you and in the world, they keep you in the personal self. They keep you attached to your role as an individual in a world. And what's being asked now, that is no longer where the attention goes, but the attention just keeps continually coming back to that inner self, even while acting and interacting and responding in the world. There's a sustaining of an awareness of who you actually are. This is the agreement being asked of you. And what he's referring to is the agreement of letting go of learning and accepting the new. In this agreement, you no longer look outside of you for answers and guidance, but look within, turning to the real self and the consciousness shared by all. Your acceptance of this promise is how you will show the way. In other words, that's how others are going to see Christ consciousness before their very eyes. It is honoring your agreement to usher in the reign of Christ. That's interesting, because that points to the fact that you made this agreement before you came into this lifetime, that you wanted to participate in this Christ consciousness action. The denial of the old, which again is learning, the idea of pattern of learning and looking without, and the acceptance of the new, which is accepting and being willing to see what is, to receive what is, and look within for your authority, is the next step. So that willingness to receive what is, it seems so contrary at first, because we have been so entrenched in the habit of trying to control what is, trying to manage what is, trying to deny what is. And now we are being asked to accept what is. So a really good way to do this is to just constantly check with yourself, what's true for me right now? What am I feeling right now? What am I experiencing right now? And by doing that, you're willing to receive what is instead of refusing it and trying to turn it into what you think it should be. So this whole idea of complete acceptance will be advanced more and more in the ensuing chapters, but really play with it. Just really try to accept on a deep level whatever is true for you in every moment. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next time.